It's been almost 12 years since the final episode of the CW's hit TV series Gossip Girl premiered. At the time, I was in the trenches of middle school, a little younger than the show's target demographic. But that didn't stop me or any of the other 13-year-old girls in my grade from tuning in. We had all binge-watched the show on Netflix and caught the first 9 episodes of the final season on demand or recorded them without our parents' permission, and couldn't wait to see how the show would wrap up. It's not a stretch to say that I was hooked. Gossip Girl had everything a young me wanted from a TV show. It was idealistic New York living with beautiful clothes, beautiful people, and non-stop romantic drama. I got my popcorn ready and put on some lip gloss so I could feel a little bit more part of the Upper East Side world as I sat down to watch the finale. It was perfect. Everything ended exactly how I was hoping. Dan married Serena, Chuck married Blair, Jenny was redeemed, and Bart was defeated. I had no complaints on the show's ending. Even the reveal that the anonymous scandal blogger herself was Lonely Boy Dan Humphrey the whole time. At 13, I can only assume that I wasn't analyzing the plausibility or narrative merit that this choice had in any substantive way. The explanation the show presented to me made sense, so I went on with my life. In the days following the finale, Facebook and Twitter were swarmed with articles about how horrible the decision to make Dan Gossip Girl was. A take that is still the leading opinion of today, and one that is still actively being debated online. The thing is, I disagree. After 11 years, many debates with friends, and numerous rewatches of the series, I still hold the same opinion I had then today. Dan being Gossip Girl is the best ending for the show. And I'm going to prove that not only does Dan being Gossip Girl make sense, but that there is no other ending possible that would have been as satisfying. Dan began his relationship with Manhattan's elite in 2005 when he transferred to St. Jude for his freshman year, going unnoticed and friendless for his first few months at school. On October 8, 2005, Dan was accidentally invited to a party hosted by Blair for a girl named Katie. Dan meets a drunk Serena, they share a brief conversation, and Dan immediately falls for her. Sometime shortly after their meeting, Gossip Girl makes her first blast. It was about Serena's white dress getting wet and becoming see-through on a 9th grade class trip. Dan wanted to write his way into the world of the Upper East Side, and Serena was his muse. Quickly after his first post, Gossip Girl blows up and becomes an unstoppable monster, with everyone sending in tips and reading blasts. In their sophomore year, Serena gets drunk on Thanksgiving and almost gets hit by a car, but is saved by a still unknown Dan. Around December of 2006 is the Shepherd wedding and the night of Pete Fairman's death. Serena leaves town to attend boarding school for her second semester of sophomore year. A few days before junior year starts, Serena returns and the events of season 1 and 2 occur before the first failed attempt to unmask Gossip Girl happens on graduation day in 2009. Dan remains the anonymous blogger until he decides to shut down the site for good in season 5, when a blast indirectly leads to Chuck and Blair getting into a nearly fatal car crash. The site was stolen for a short time by a bored Georgina Sparks until her identity was discovered. Georgina sends the official Gossip Girl laptop to Serena with a note instructing her to take over. Serena runs the blog until the finale of season 5, when the true Gossip Girl is reinstated. Dan operates the blog as usual until he reveals his identity to everyone in the series finale. If I'm going to make you believe that Dan is, and always has been, the perfect Gossip Girl, I have a few rules that must be considered. In order for Dan to be Gossip Girl, a few things must fall into line. Dan is seen throughout the series to have a code of ethics. The morality of his ethics might be a little hazy, but he was always a man of his word, and I think he carries this conviction into his work as Gossip Girl, having a code of ethics when it comes to the content he puts out. I think Dan lived by the rule, if a blast comes through, even if it was about himself, he would post it, no matter the consequences. A common argument against Dan being Gossip Girl is, why would he post something so horrible about himself? For example, why would he reveal that he and Serena have a half-sibling, or that he slept with his teacher? This conundrum is actually perfectly explained away in the final episode by Dan himself.
Yeah, I overheard 2 girls talking about you in your white dress getting wet. And, one girl thought that you would be a laughingstock, you know, and that everyone would be talking about you. But then her friend said, that's the point. You're no one until you're talked about.
Dan believed to his core that as long as people were talking about him, it really didn't matter what they were saying. A philosophy the show repeatedly subscribes to. In the world of Manhattan's elite, it doesn't really matter what you do, as long as the public perception is achieving what you want. In Dan's case, the always invisible boy from Brooklyn wanted to be noticed, wanted to be inside, no matter the reason or the consequences. Also, Dan is clearly okay with sabotaging himself. In the final season, he publishes a scathing chapter on Serena, despite saying moments prior to sending it out, "There is no winning without Serena." Dan believed that he had to prove he was finally on the inside, and to be on the inside, the others will always forgive your actions.
What I did is no worse than what all your friends do to each other every day. You try to ruin each other, and then you sit down for Thanksgiving, and you call yourselves family.
You were supposed to be different.
I used to be. Got me nowhere. So now I'm the same.
People also struggle to see Dan as Gossip Girl because he spends the entirety of the first couple of seasons vocally despising the lifestyle of the Upper East Side. But we know from a chat that he had with Vanessa at the end of season 4 that this disdain was mostly a facade. Vanessa goes to Dan's loft and finds the first draft of his book, Inside, and reads it. She calls Dan, and he tells her that he's been working on the book on and off for 5 years. She confronts him, saying,
I always thought Serena was the reason you fell into the Upper East Side, but it was more than that.
Vanessa, seriously, this is none of your business.
You always wanted in. Maybe more than Jenny.
If you believe that Dan would write Inside over the first 4 seasons, then you can believe that he would be Gossip Girl. The other big issue fans have with Dan being Gossip Girl are all the moments we see him alone, reacting to a new blast, and looking shocked at the information. For this, we would have to reframe the timeline of the episodes a little bit. The times we see Dan looking surprised at a Gossip Girl post aren't actually him looking at the post, but him looking surprised at the original tip coming through. This might take a little stretching of the imagination, but this issue would also disqualify most of the characters from being Gossip Girl, all of whom have been seen looking shocked at a new blast coming through. I know what you're thinking. What about those times when Dan is in a room with everyone when a new blast comes through? Well, this is pretty easy to explain away with the technology of the time. He had all the blasts on a timer to be posted at specific moments, so he can be in the room while still sending the blast. My final explanation for these time inconsistencies is Jenny. Because Jenny has known Dan was Gossip Girl for the majority of the show, I don't think it would be a stretch for him to ask for her assistance in the occasional posting to the site, especially if he is in the trenches of the scandal at hand. The times where Dan is reacting to a post could be times when Jenny posted the tip on his behalf. By the time we, as viewers, are introduced to the world of Manhattan's elite in the pilot, Gossip Girl is already an established and trusted source of information to the kids of Constance and St. Jude. The site almost runs itself. A tip and photo evidence come in, Dan reads it to ensure it's worthy of a post, and writes a quick and witty remark. He isn't out searching for tips. All the gossip comes straight to him. He just needs to click post. In the graduation episode, Gossip Girl said it herself. Without everyone sending in tips, she would be nothing.
You wanted to meet Gossip Girl? Well, look around. You just did. I'm nothing without you.
It makes sense narratively for Dan to be Gossip Girl. He is not only smart enough and a skilled enough writer to keep the site up, running, and continuously successful, but he is the only character that had a consistent motive strong enough to take such extreme actions. People have been theorizing online who Gossip Girl could be from the show's premiere. And with some fans unhappy with the answer the finale gave, there are still debates online as to who should have been Gossip Girl. Executive producer Joshua Samfron explains that Eric was intended to be Gossip Girl up until season 2, when the New York Post leaked the information, causing the writers to shift gears into Nate's direction for a time. In contrast, fellow executive producer Stephanie Savage told E! News that Dan was always intended to be Gossip Girl. We never really entertained any other ideas of who Gossip Girl was. It was whether we were going to reveal it. Interestingly, in the pilot episode, test audiences thought that Dan was Gossip Girl. It's when he's seen on his computer looking at Gossip Girl. The way it was edited, that he was typing as the voice was coming up, people thought they were being told that he was Gossip Girl. So we actually had to re-edit that sequence. The other top contenders to be the brains behind the blog that are supported by fans are Dorota, Eric, and Nate. I personally take issue with any of these characters being Gossip Girl, and believe that no other character fits the bill as well as Dan does. First, let's talk about Dorota and Eric. Both are side characters that do not appear regularly throughout the show, making the argument that they are Gossip Girl harder to disprove, because we don't see what they're doing as consistently as the main cast. However, I would argue that making them, or any side character, the big bad, would feel a little cheap and unsatisfying. In my view, the only characters worthy of being Gossip Girl are our 7 leads: Serena, Blair, Dan, Chuck, Nate, Jenny, or Vanessa. Even if you disagree, Eric and Dorota are still not good choices. Eric and Dorota are shown time and time again to be more kind, loyal, thoughtful, and trustworthy than any of our leads. To be Gossip Girl would ruin their likability and would erase all the moral fiber that we have been shown that they have. Eric loved his sister and never wanted her to be involved in drama, which is the exact opposite motive to being Gossip Girl. Dorota is a full-time mother and a loyal employee to Blair's family. Making her Gossip Girl is the equivalent to Eloise believing one of the maids to be Lady Whistledown in Bridgerton.
You believe a servant would ever have the time to be Lady Whistledown with all the work we must do?
To think she would have the time to be Gossip Girl undervalues the hard work and energy it takes for an immigrant mother to work in New York City. Nate is slightly harder to disregard, but like Eric and Dorota, the personality profile of Nate doesn't fit the bill for being an anonymous mastermind blogger. Most obviously, Nate has never been known for cunning or smarts. 2 requirements for the job. The main argument in favor of Nate being Gossip Girl is the reveal that he had never sent in a tip in season 5. I understand the logic here. I also thought that that was what the show was insinuating on my first watch. But what that scene actually shows is way more impactful when looking at Nate's character. Nate never having sent in a tip means that he never wanted to harm his friends, and that he meant it when he said in season 1 that he didn't want to be part of the established world that was offered to him on a silver platter. As for the other main 6, it is safe to say that Serena, Blair, and Chuck were never really in the running to be Gossip Girl beyond season 2. None of these characters have an appropriate motive to keep up such a long-lasting scheme. Jenny would have been too young and out of the loop going to school in Brooklyn to have started the blog. Vanessa had the brains and the disdain for the rich to possibly use the site as a tool of destruction, but I think her transition into knowing and caring about the Upper East Side comes as the show progresses, whereas Jenny and Dan had the interest from the get-go. I'm not going to try and explain away every plot hole that Dan being Gossip Girl creates. That would end up being a very long and convoluted video. The truth is that plot holes and minor canonical mistakes are found in even the most perfectly crafted long-form stories. TV shows or book series that span across many years are going to suffer from the occasional plot hole. Inconsistencies are a symptom of the genre, but I don't think they are worth throwing the whole ending out to rectify. We shouldn't value perfect continuity above the character development and messaging of the work. At the end of the day, Dan being Gossip Girl serves the story and his character motivations the best.
I invited you into my home, Dan, my world, and then you just humiliate me.
That is the issue. It's my world.
Oh, come on. It's a figure of speech.
No, it has always been your world, and you've never let me forget it. I've always been a visitor. The poor kid from Brooklyn who you've never seen as an equal to you.
Okay, so this is your payback.
A good finale aims to solve each character's original problem. For example, Nate's original problem is that he felt everything in his life had been decided for him, but he wanted to find his own path, separating himself from the expectations placed upon him by his family. And by the end of the show, Nate had created a successful business unattached to the Vanderbilt family legacy, fulfilling his season 1 goals. Dan being Gossip Girl aids in resolving his original problem of being the overlooked and unappreciated outsider. When looking at Dan's motivations, personality, and deep understanding of how people born into the extreme wealth of the Upper East Side think and operate, him being Gossip Girl doesn't feel like a stretch. The constant alluding to Fitzgerald and Truman Capote in the series are not errors, with Dan's story often mirroring the plot points of The Great Gatsby, and his motives being very similar to Capote's ambitions. Dan was following in the footsteps of his outsider literary predecessors.
But that gave me the idea. If I wasn't born into this world, maybe I could write myself into it.
The final reveal also plays to the show's biggest theme, that secrets, gossip, status, and wealth are all corrupting forces. But they are also the real powers in the world of the Upper East Side, and without them, a person will never be an insider.